site appears to be the Aucilla Place Plantation. We think it's Aucilla Place. We're almost certain it's Aucilla Place because the Randalls own 2 plantations, including the Belmont Plantation. That was located further to the west in central Jefferson County near their in-laws, the Gambles. And Aucilla Place was located closer to the river itself. The site that we're on has the right types of early territorial period artifacts and other materials to suggest that it may be the main house and the quarters for the Aucilla Place Plantation.
It's the crock. Where the crock, this is the glaze that's on it. And it's a bottom piece.
What was crock used for?
To store things.
How did they make it?
I'm not sure what the chemical composition is, if it's different than other glasses. But for some reason, different colors of glass were more popular or common at different times, which is one way you can kind of date when that glass was made.
This is exactly the stuff we're looking at over there. That is pearlware. This is also from the period of time that you've got the Randall occupation here. This that you were talking about, the red on white, I'm real glad to see that too. This is actually, looking at the back of it, you see how it's got a smoother coat than whiteware? It doesn't have the crackling. This looks like cheese that you may have some hand painted or possibly transfer printed. They were just starting to transfer print I think this is creamware. This again is going to be Grandma's China for the people that are coming to Jefferson County in 1827. You got whiteware. You got green in here?
I don't know if it's in this bag or not, but
Okay. You got some porcelain.
got some blue transfer.
Yep. You got, all right, now hold on just a minute. Let's look at this closer. All right, now you see that, all right, yeah.
There it is.
This is another kind of pearlware. And this is also, yeah, you see the back on that? This is rarer than you're going to see. The blue on white is the more common. This green on white is rarer. It was a little more expensive, but a guy like Thomas Randall, you know, who's a member of the upper class, this is the kind of thing that he's going to have with him. Now there's some later stuff in here. There's some stuff that's going to be later 19th century or even on up into the 20th century, but this is the kind of thing that you're going to see at the Randall Plantation site. And look how far back that other flag is. I mean, look at the area that all this is scattered. This isn't just, I mean, I'm talking all the way back to 14. This isn't just a little tiny occupation. This has got to be a plantation from that time period, because it's the only thing that would account for the area that's covered and the amount of territorial stuff, except for a fort.
Somewhere.
But it's not historic.
But you see that right there? You got this, you know, aqua glass. You got the little bubbles in it. This is the kind of thing you're going to see from that period of time. Now I'll show you the difference. This piece right here is going to be late 19th, possibly early 20th century. It's going to be 20th century probably, because it looks like you got marks there. But then you got this is from the 19th century. That's why I'm thinking that maybe some of the families that are still living here around Lamont, including the folks, you know, the site that you filmed, Cheese, up there, some of the folks that built that building, their families may have been living here originally, because you've got a date range on these artifacts that covers 100 years after 1827 on up to the 1920s and 30s. You could have had one of our settlements here like some of these others that were abandoned when African American families in this area began doing more of the Great Migration in the early 20th century. That's the only thing I can think of to account for not just the population drop-off, but also the fact that everywhere we're looking in Jefferson County, you start to get houses and other things from the same period of time. It's like you had this big, huge, successful, you know, group of towns, people who were doing well financially, and then all of a sudden everybody just starts moving out.
You just walk along and find them.
But it puts out pretty, depending on the variety, either pink or white with red striped flowers. CRINUM. It was a very common homestead type of plant because it was easily dug up, transported. You know, they're a very tough, hardy plant. Because it's been what they call thermally altered so that it is more stable for making arrowheads and other tools out of. Makes it almost like a waxy consistency on the surface. And in the unheated state, this would have been white, but as it gets heated, it turned anywhere from a dark red to an orange to a pink.
My working hypothesis is this has to be associated with the Randall Plantation up there. And we are just about the right distance proportionally on that map south of the curve. We're in the right direction, which is slightly to the southwest.
I have another question.
And here's the kicker, nearly, well, hold just one second, boss lady.
You go ahead.
All of those artifacts that are in those bags and a good chunk of the artifacts that are in these bags are territorial period. I mean, pearlware, British stoneware, creamware, which looks like some of this stuff is. Now this is going to be so many thousands of years before that, it's not even funny. This heat-treated chert, remember those little flakes we were finding on the other side of the pond? if this is in here, this may be a long time before anybody, you know, showed up from Europe or Africa. This is the kind.
There too. That's old brick.
Yeah. Well, my working hypothesis is, guys, we are right on top of either the Randall Plantation house or one of the main parts of the plantation, because that assemblage over there, there is nothing that is outside the territorial period. I mean, it's all exactly the right time period.
A second question.
Yes, ma'am.
We are near about where a line where the second DeSoto crossing may have been, where the trail is.
Yes, ma'am.
What does that put this property in the?
All right.
In the
It's
relationship
like a
to
mile from the road up there.
We have to think of it both in terms of distance and artifacts. Distance, we are within the range that DeSoto's army, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if a big chunk of them did cross right here in this area. However,
we had 400 or 600 or something.
in terms of the artifacts, all of the Native American artifacts, this stuff right here is thousands of years even before the Appalachian. You know, I mean, this is their ancestors. To put it in perspective, there was as much difference between the Native Americans in time, between the Native Americans that made this thing and the Appalachia, as there is between us as modern day Americans and the ancient Egyptians. I mean, we're talking about 5,000 years in the past, even for them.
Not a native, but yesterday when we were talking about the crinum lilies, these were the same thing. These were what everybody plant because they plant them and
Red cedar,
they just grow. It's just
it's more likely red cedar.
and bloom. No care, no nothing. So it's just what they call a pass-along plant.
But you look right there at that corner. They've got, yeah, and not only that, they've got the notches right here. What may be is that somebody got the old building and has like built on top of it and added to it. And that shed in the back, Lance, that you were pointing out, I think that's probably also one of these older buildings that somebody's added to. Is the part that has never disappeared, because that brick is still covered with plaster and it's still got the original hewn beam on top of it. Somebody came along later and put a new floor and roof over it, but this building too, at least the base of it, was also built in the early 1800s. And here's the thing, since the Randalls were making their own bricks and probably their own plaster too, my bet is it was enslaved people on the Randall Plantation that built this and that built the older parts of those other buildings we're looking at. Got a combination of bricks here. This part right here, you look at this nice solid brick that's right here, this is going to be later 19th or 20th century. But down here, I mean, part of this is covered over, but some of this interior brick, this is probably the older part of it. This may have been the well once upon a time, because if you look right down there at the bottom, it's kind of hard to see, but that brick and a couple of these right here are that kind of porous early 19th century brick like we're seeing with the houses over there and like we're seeing with the older buildings in town. Artifacts that I think are from the Randall Plantation period. Lance found this piece of limestone that has the red color there. This has some iron oxide in it and it's been burned. Now, in order to make plaster like we saw in those buildings to cover bricks, you'd have to crush and burn limestone, and this looks like the byproduct you'd get from that. And right near that, I found this piece of pottery right here. Now, but you would have had a situation where enslaved workers at the plantations were actually skilled craftspeople. They made brick, they were carpenters. That wood that's over there would have been hand hewn. They were skilled blacksmiths, because those nails, the original ones, would have been pounded out on an anvil if they weren't bought like from a northern factory where they were making cut nails. So everywhere around you is the evidence in these old buildings of the people who lived here. And I got to tell you something else. One thing Cheese and I have found in doing our research here, you go out through some of these fields or the woods that look like bare grounds, you walk and you know right where you're looking, you find settlements everywhere. 100 years ago, there were more people, a lot more people living in Jefferson County than there are today. A lot of the old settlements during the Great Migration, people moved out of here and they abandoned them, but there were a third again, half again as many people living in Jefferson County back then as there are today. And there were houses and churches and businesses all over the place that people don't realize used to be there.
Maypop, and it's a wild native, what?
Passion flower.
Passion vine, and it's a food for several of the butterflies in the fall. This is Turtleria. They also used these when they dried to make rattles, because the seeds in them also was very poisonous to cattle.
Here we got a well over here.
There's a well over there too.
I can tell you, well or drain.
We're serving the irrigation pump there.
Yeah.
Mm.
You never find hog in a pre-contact context. If you find a hog bone, you know it has to be after Europeans came here, because DeSoto brought the first pigs. They didn't have any refrigeration, so he figured the way to keep his army fed is to have a herd of pigs running along with him on the hoof, and some of them escaped and they became the ancestors of the animals that you see out in the woods today. So you want to see a living Spanish artifact, you find a Florida feral hog. It doesn't matter if you're talking about like the older Native American towns and villages that were here, or if you were talking about the Spanish missions or the American plantations. There's one thing that's all the same as far as like using all the parts of the animal. What you would do, the Indians used to say that every animal had just enough brains to tan its own hide, and what you would do is you would take the brain, and there's always a special kind of mix. Sometimes it would be stale urine, sometimes it would be water that was mixed with certain kind of plants or chemicals, but you would mix the brain with that mixture, and you would rub that into the hide after you clean the hair and stuff off of it. And let's say, you know, you were talking about a plantation. You have somebody who's a leather worker. You could take the brains from the cow, you'd save some of them, and if you weren't cooking them or eating them, what you would do is you would make up a mixture, and that could be the material that you use to tan the hides of the animals. So if you wanted leather for boots or belts or that kind of thing, that's how you'd make it. Earlier than that, the time that this was the hacienda for the Spanish governor of Florida, I mean, this was where the first Spanish cattle were brought in, and that's probably a part of their operation, is doing things like making leather. Wouldn't surprise me to find out the Appalachian taught the Spaniards and some of the folks who were here about that, because they were making leather from animal skins thousands of years before anybody showed up from Europe or from Africa.